Power up. Welcome to Energypreneurs, where I bring to you the exciting new opportunities in solar power, battery, and electric cars. I'm your host, Sohail Hasni. I have been tracking and analyzing these technologies on LinkedIn and Twitter for more than 10 years. Now we meet on podcast. Okay, Jamie, good morning.
Good morning, Sale.
You're looking very good. You are in Japan, I believe, no?
In Tokyo at the moment, we're on the Asia Pacific Road Safety Observatory annual meeting.
Maybe introduce yourself first. Thank you.
Yep, sure. I'm Jamie Leather, a director at the Asian Development Bank, a director in the Transport Group. My main focus of responsibility is looking at emerging areas in the transport sector more generally, but also specifically how ADB can provide technical and financial assistance in those emerging areas. And as you said, e-vehicles, climate change, climate adaptation, mitigation, very important for transport to play its full role in addressing significant increases in emissions, but also climate impacts on infrastructure across Asia and the Pacific.
What are the very exciting projects right now on your plate?
We have a few projects on the e-vehicle side. Interestingly, quite a lot of those are coming from our private sector assistance.
Mm-hmm.
But on the sovereign support direct to governments, a lot of it is on urban public transport systems. So on the e-buses, because those vehicles are wrapped up into franchising mechanisms of the public transport, whereas our private sector colleagues within ADB have been working more on the vehicle manufacturing side, the charging infrastructure, fleet management, private sector operations. So there's a combination of the two. But one final point on that, the countries where the private sector coming in have very strong e-vehicle policies. What our assessment is that has de-risked companies, private companies or individuals to make that investment decision should they have a combustion engine or an e-vehicle. If the policy in a particular country or economy is well established, it's another push in the direction of e-vehicles. So that in particular across Asia Pacific, People's Republic of China, Vietnam, Thailand, India, and Georgia are very advanced within their e-vehicle transition. Others are catching up, but some are still in the early stages of developing cohesive and coherent e-vehicle transition policies.
It's interesting. You mentioned some very large countries and very small countries. How much of these are driven by champions in the government side?
Two of them are very large, obviously China and India. The other way of breaking it down, maybe those countries that have a large or relatively large automobile industry. Obviously, in the case of China and India, they want to develop new types of vehicles, both for the domestic market and exports. I wonder whether countries like Thailand that have a lot of production facilities, so the incoming investments, they're also making that transition to position themselves in Southeast Asia. A lot of the vehicles' final manufacturing or assembly is in Thailand. So again, Thailand has a large a role in the vehicle manufacturing chain. So I wonder also whether that just elevates the need for change within the government more broadly, and therefore that push. Certainly we all are aware how strong the government of China have been in pushing that shift to e-vehicles. India has in recent years made significant gains as well. And I think now India is probably leading in electric truck, their e-fast program. So that's some of the most advanced longer distance freight movements, e-vehicle adaptation or early piloting. A number of these countries are really pushing that, and that, as I said earlier, de-risks investment decisions or the purchase decisions that private companies or individuals are making.
You're right. So either the countries where they're trying to protect their their sort of existing ICE industry, in other countries where they're saying, no, this is a new opportunity, we need to get some government funds, grants, so that you can create the demand at the customer end, and then you can manufacture something like that.
We see a number of different pushes have to happen for that to be able to move it forward. Government agencies that need to be involved, and whether that is on the climate change and whoever may be involved in putting together the NDCs and the LTSs where the transport policy can be brought in, whether it's the automobile industry agencies or whether it's the transport and the vehicle inspection type, there's a whole host of different government entities involved. Some research we were looking at, if everyone had perfect knowledge and you were to buy a new vehicle today, what type of vehicle would be most suitable or most financially viable for you as an individual or a fleet operator? And the smaller the vehicle or the more mileage you do, e-vehicles are the way to go. In terms of the mileage, because the operating cost sets the higher capital purchase price. So if you're a taxi, a bus, an urban delivery, you're doing a lot of miles, kilometers a day, it makes huge amounts of sense to move to e-vehicles. The smaller 2-3-wheelers, regardless of distance travel, because they're smaller, therefore the battery is much lighter, therefore the capital cost isn't that much higher than an ICE equivalent. So in almost all cases, e-vehicles, 2-wheelers, 3-wheels are better than ICE 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers across most of Asia and the Pacific. Obviously, issues on charging infrastructure and range, those are factored in as well. But if everyone had perfect knowledge and was making those decisions, the future for e-vehicles looks very bright. When I mentioned the government policy, it's another push in that direction on top of the economics of such a decision. And again, not everyone may have perfect knowledge in terms of their investment decisions. Businesses more so perhaps than individuals. Some people may still like their big V8, like the sound of the engines on the motorbikes, whatever it is. But if everyone was much more economically minded, e-vehicles is more efficient over a life cycle, capital cost and operating cost.
Amazing. So how the world has changed in the last 10 years, no?
Yes. Yeah. And increasing to do so as battery prices and vehicle prices come down. So obviously that higher barrier to entry is there. But sorry, one point to add, another thing that is restricting the rapid uptake, particularly on 2-3-wheelers and those smaller owner-operators of local taxi services or single-owner operator jeepneys or motorbikes, it's that initial cash, and getting access to good finance is a barrier. Because if you are an operator and you may not have a bank account, you may not have these as a delivery driver or whatever, how are you going to suddenly pay the extra 2,000-3,000 required, the difference between an ICE vehicle and an e-vehicle? So one thing we're looking at is, in addition to pushing the policies on e-vehicles, in addition to demonstrating the benefits and piloting some of those programs, looking at setting up SME access or individual access to finance that could allow to offset some of that barrier in terms of the higher initial purchase cost.
Yeah, that's actually the problem right now for scaling up, and especially low income end, because you don't have the upfront capital. And the interest rates are right now, I mean, the Philippines, it's scary, 3% a month. Nothing is viable when you pay 3% a month to borrow money. This is the low income earner, right? That's what, when ADB did the e-trike project, that was the idea that the delta of savings, you pay that back and eventually it becomes a rent-to-own scheme. Okay, that's, you're making access to fund for SMEs, right?
That's what we're planning to do, or it's in the process of being established. You're exactly right. A lot of the financing is set up by the people who are selling the vehicles. So quite often it's like a 3-year payback period and a 35% or ridiculously high interest rate. Rather than putting subsidies on the vehicles, can we actually just reduce the cost of borrowing to purchase that vehicle in the first place? It seems a much more sensible way, because that kind of an interest rate or loan period seems to any promotion of that switch to e-vehicles.
Yeah. That's why that particular project that I mentioned had a ADB loan of 25 years and CTF loan of 40 years, but Department of Finance tries to recover from the drivers within 5 years. Of course, that doesn't work, because the idea was you spread it so that the cost becomes less. Discussing with any of the power companies to actually provide a lease to own service, because it's a new business for them. In Australia, I think already one does. You can buy a Tesla from a power company and pay. It's a lease to own. And they provide free electricity wherever you will go.
Interesting. And many of the countries have different systems or different relationships, or big organizations cover a whole host of different businesses or interests. Therefore, some of the power companies will also be bringing in e-vehicles in the Philippines. We're again mentioning the Philippines, but Ayala Corporation is bringing in Gogoro. They're also bringing in BYD on the four-wheel family side, and they're doing a lot of the charging infrastructure around Metro Manila and also involved in power generation and supply too. There's a virtuous circle, but depending which way you look at it, the power, the charging infrastructure, the vehicles are all seem to be interconnected with each other. So yes, we have been speaking, but it varies country by country who are the major players to discuss in terms of the vehicles, the technologies, and all of the other components as well. But quite often they're also bankers and financiers. They have access to different types of finance that we could bring in. And if we can use ADB's concessional funding with the Philippine government in that case, then the commercial payback, clawback, similar to the one which we were setting up many years ago with the e-trike project. How does the government come in with some kind of concessional finance linked to the financial instruments that are already in place, but providing much more attractive loan?
I think the point that you make, the one is that's the thing. It's a financing problem right now. Technology is there. It is cheaper to run. That's why I remember talking to finance minister of Kyrgyz Republic many years back, and I was telling her, the problem is your electricity cost is 2 cents a kilowatt hour, but if you double to 4 cents, there will be a war. But without that, the electricity companies will not be financially viable. But that 10 kilowatt hour can run a small car up to 100 kilometers. Then people will compare with the gasoline cost, saying, hey, it's a $5 as opposed to 10. Then maybe they will pay 50 cents a kilowatt hour. They don't care because they're comparing with the cost of gasoline, right? So that's why if you bundle that, it could be a new business, and we can easily make all the sort of poorly performing electricity companies in the region suddenly profitable by selling electricity for transport.
And if that increase, then there'd probably be a knock-on effect in terms of the cost of power generation or the supply or the purchase of those rates. And at the same time, on the fossil fuel side, gasoline imports is a significant part or an issue across many of the countries as well. I often wonder, the sort of simple binary decision is it's an ICE vehicle or an e-vehicle, but the reality is it's a much more complicated task to get your head around. It's the finance, it's the power generation, it's the charging infrastructure, it's the automobile manufacturers, it's a whole host of other very important players as well.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, at the consumer end, this range anxiety that has been fed in by the sort of fossil fuel industry, car industry still remains like, when I bought my car in Sydney and my wife, the first thing is, how many? The same range anxiety question. Now she charges once a week, once a 10 days. Doesn't worry, it got used to it. So even in the Philippines, I was talking to someone, how often you charge? He said, yeah, twice a month. But you go to a conferences about EV, first thing is, what's the range? Can I go to Baguio and come back? When have you been to Baguio last time? Oh, 5 years ago.
There's a few things that it's no surprise that Asia has been dominating in terms of e-vehicle uptake, partly because of the manufacturing. So a lot of the vehicles are produced in this region and sold on. But we estimated that originally it was around 95% of the vehicles, but a lot of people, the focus is on the Teslas and the four-wheel vehicles. But once you incorporate the 2 3-wheelers,
yes,
numbers are just staggering for the Asia region. But the other part there is that range anxiety is much less of an issue. Most people do not go away for the weekend or travel long distances. They travel in and around urban areas, and it's 4 or 5 kilometers each direction. So like you said, you're charging twice a month. It's not an issue. And if you go on a long trip, maybe once the road network evolves and develops, people will be taking longer trips. But at the moment, most of the countries across Asia, that you're not traveling long distance. Sorry, as an individual, you're not traveling long distance. They're obviously long distance buses and they're traveling long distance, but most trips are relatively small. The other thing in Asia, obviously, economies are growing. People are getting wealthier and they're moving to the private modes of transport. So they're less tied than those in the West, maybe to, I've always owned this type of a car and I've always had a big V8. And so that's what I'm going to continue to buy. If it's your first time for a motorbike or your first time for a four-wheeler, your choices are much broader and you would look at it in a very different way. But the leasing model of vehicle ownership as well, or battery swapping, if it's possible, certainly in the 2-3-wheelers, the Gogoro example. You can look at different ownership models, different usage models, then as you're new to private mobility. But I should also add that for sustainable urban transport, private mobility, there's no problem owning the vehicle, but please do use public transport or non-motorized transport for your daily commutes. I should add that, being a very strong advocate of sustainable transport.
Yeah, true. But at the same time, as automation comes in, remember, I was in a presentation, I think you organized many years ago, that all the cars can flock together and can be a public transport during daytime when they're autonomous vehicles, right? So that will still be there, right?
Yeah, and we're seeing more and more shared use of vehicles in urban areas, and I think that makes incredible sense. Now, I hope everyone doesn't want to use those vehicles during peak periods, because hopefully they're using the public transport, but for other trip in the middle
No,
of the
but I'm
day,
saying collectively they can be a public
Yes.
transport as well, right? Private vehicle coming in, flocking together, right? If they're autonomous, you don't need 10 drivers, but 10 car can follow side by side, almost become a bus. I think the simple message that a lot of people still don't understand, especially I was talking to people in the Philippines, in case really get a emergency situation, you can always go to a PowerPoint, run a simple sort of extension cable 10 meters and say, hey, I just need 10 meters so that it will give me extra kilometer or two to get out. It's not that you are stranded. Is ADB planning to promote some of those communications, simple thing about electric vehicles, just to encourage more adoption even among ADB staff and everywhere, resident missions, right?
Certainly internally, you've always got to walk the walk, talk the talk, or whatever else, but we're starting to put charging infrastructure within our buildings as well. So that's there at a very small scale. But you're right. Do we need full charging infrastructure? And yes, we are working in 3-4 countries now, supporting the development and rollout of charging infrastructure in urban areas.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add that we are future-proofing any road projects we provide support to make sure that there is charging infrastructure to be put in place. Quite often, some of our road assistance is in areas where the distribution network may not be yet in place. So again, it's a link between transport and energy. If we're building a new road across a rural area, not a rural road, but a sort of intercity road, can we ensure that the power distribution follows that alignment? Therefore, charging infrastructure can be put in place, because the distribution network is then along those critical arterial roads. And that's the sort of future-proofing we're putting there as well.
Especially as batteries are hitting $50 a kilowatt hour, you can put solar charger everywhere. No cabling needed, right? It could be almost given as a franchise saying, hey, this is the road, install as many as you want, sort of auction of the franchise right to somebody saying, okay, run it, because it's money to be made.
Some of the models we're looking on the public transport, which I said was more on the sovereign type of support to governments rather than private sector, the bus depots that we're part of the public transport improvements, solar panels with battery charging facilities and storage, and maybe even battery swapping with buses. If you purchase the right type of vehicles and you have the right sort of depot facilities where that more cumbersome battery swapping because of the weight, rather than a Gogoro 2-wheeler type of battery swapping by hand. But we are looking at that. So on-site renewable energy sources with storage of those batteries into the public transport bus systems as well.
Yes, amazing, because the way the prices are coming down, both the car and the batteries and solar panel, I don't think anyone should be buying any ICE car, especially government fleet, because this will be all stranded asset within 5-7 years. You won't be able to sell.
That raises another point, though, on the second-hand market and the export of second-hand vehicles and where they're exported to. It could be a serious issue in North American second-hand cars trickling down through Mexico and on into South America, European cars heading towards Africa, or developing economies in Asia receiving cars from Asia or other locations. So I think there is a need for some type of agreement between those countries that are saying the end of the ICE vehicle and what is the end of life of that ICE vehicle. And hopefully it's not just exported to become a new vehicle. with another 20 years of life in the developing economy. So the benefits and the pollutant associated with that is just not transferred to another country.
That's what I personally think, although I did not. I spoke to at least 30 people on this. No one supports, but I still think that retrofitting of ICE vehicle into electric will be a market, not because of financial reason that I can buy a new car from China much cheaper, more sort of environmental reasons. And Philippine Jeepney project, an ideal case. With battery swapping, lighter battery may be a better option because it's a cultural heritage at 250,000 jeepneys across the country. Why you want to import everything brand new? Maybe some local technology. These jeepneys don't go much, right? So that area needs to be looked at. So in my view,
we are in the process of trying to establish a center of excellence in the Philippines for e-vehicles. And it's partly on the education side. So looking at the just transition, there's a lot of mechanical engineers around who can fix ICE vehicles, but who's going to service the increase in e-vehicles? And as the other part of this center of excellence, it's not just on the training of the technicians, but could it be used as a test bed to see retrofitting vehicles in addition, running in parallel to ICE and fully assembled e-vehicles coming in? What's the difference of costs, operations for a ICE, fully assembled, manufactured EV, or a Philippine ingenuity of a vehicle being retrofitted to EV? So the Center of Excellence will have both the training, but also be able to prepare two-wheelers, three-wheelers, light-duty vehicles, and buses in terms of retrofit, as well as testing those alongside fully manufactured EVs from scratch, as well as ICEs, and just get real live data. What is the comparative costs and operating models for each of those?
Amazing. Who are you partnering? You must, is it Department of Energy or universities or not yet?
That's the combination. So we've been talking with the government, obviously, but all sides of the government, TESDA on the education side, energy, transport. But the actual partnership, ironically, comes from Apple Diab Foundation. Apple Diab is Black IP. Yes. His foundation provides a lot of support to education in the Philippines, and his hometown or area is Pampanga, up near Clark. So that's why there's this focus on the just transition, the technician training. But obviously the potential for retrofit type of e-vehicle manufacturing in the Philippines, plus the education of those technicians to construct and service those vehicles. So it's with the government, the initial discussions, but also very strong MOU relationship with Apple Diab Foundation. One other benefit of that, hopefully, that the app has much more appeal to the jeepney drivers and the tricycle drivers than you or I would have. And if he tells them this is a good idea, they may be more eager to listen to him as a hero of the Philippine people than perhaps you or I. So that's another good reason to collaborate with the Apple Diab Foundation on that Center of Excellence as well.
Okay, I'd like to be connected if I can be of any help, but this is very exciting. Excellent. Just one idea there. Earlier you mentioned about second-hand electric vehicle coming in, right? It was an ICE, but I'm saying second-hand electric vehicle is also important because this is what Australia has done. Government has parked enough money saying, if you're a fleet owner, government or public, you can get some subsidy from that fleet owner subsidy, so that because you buy, say, police replacing all their cars, they get X% subsidy from the federal government. The idea there is the police is going to replace the car within a year. That brings in a lot of second-hand quality car into the market so that people can buy. Are you planning to do? I think Philippines will be an ideal case to do that, no?
It's interesting. You mentioned the government side, and I'm in Tokyo at the moment for road safety. And again, secondhand vehicle imports, whether it's for safety reasons or less emission reasons on the e-vehicle side. A number of the governments who are here said they do allow import, and they're encouraging import of government vehicles for specific fire trucks, garbage trucks, that kind of special vehicle. So yes, they have been importing those, as you described in Australia, because again, the governments, in certain cases, own huge fleets of vehicles in urban areas, or governments themselves. Could we provide that transition to a more e-vehicle side? And one other point we're working on is ports and airside operations. again, e-vehicles are showing real potential that you could decarbonize your airside vehicle fleet in airports, and similarly in large port operations. A number of them are switching, again, because of the high usage over
And
and each location is slightly different. But in airports, ports, in government fleet vehicles, there is real potential, as there is in the sort of taxis and buses and 2-3-wheelers running around urban areas.
my example for Australia was also more sort of passenger vehicle, right? Government fleet cars, Toyota Camrys or whatever, say, Victorian government buying 5,000 of those next year. They have motivation now to go electric because it's getting a subsidy from the government. And those cars will be sold within a year, auctioned off, so that the private citizen, rather than buying a brand new electric car, buying a former government car, which is subsidized. So that creates a new market in the second-hand EV market.
Reference you to UNEP work, United Nations Environment Programme. We've been working with them on this second-hand car export-import dimension. Their main focus has been in the African region, and ours is in the Asia region. We've produced a couple of reports looking at the second-hand market and how that transition, either of both ICEs and e-vehicles, exported, imported, and some of those, what is the best way forward within there. We also run a series of webinars around under that program as well, but this is beyond just the second-hand, really looking at all aspects, as you were discussing many years ago, on the second life of batteries or disposal at the end of that second life, synthetic aviation fuel. So it's really looking at the whole requirements or the transition for a full decarbonization of the transport sector, of which at the moment e-vehicles is clearly one of the most readily accessible points for that change to happen.
Amazing. So if someone listening in, a government official who has ideas about electric vehicle project, how do they approach ADB?
We would be more than happy to have discussions, a visit to explore this, but through the traditional put it into the country programming discussions, what future technical or lending support you would be seeking through the resident mission in the respective countries, please reach out so we can discuss, structure some kind of concept paper, pre-feasibility assessment of what makes sense, what's the best way to package that together. But I should also add, on the private sector side, if everyone else is listening in from that side, ADB has been providing, in fact, most of our e-vehicle support, about 80% has come from our private sector. Yes, we're very keen to work with governments on policy and pilots, and particularly urban areas in terms of that public transport switch. But also our private sector colleagues are doing a lot of work in other areas of e-vehicle transition as well. So very happy. Please reach out. I presume you will get my contact details linked to this, so please do reel out. We have technical assistance, which is grant to explore these opportunities, build them up as a pre-feasibility type assessment, concept paper in ADB language, and take it to there. And then we can bring in much more concessional finance. February this year, we were very privileged to get $170 million US from GCF for e-vehicle and non-motorized transport. Coupled with ADB money, that's about $500 million of finance for urban e-vehicle switch and non-motorized promotion in 7 of our developing member countries. We're looking now whether we can do a similar model again to bring in more countries to those as well. But it's that kind of knowledge, awareness raising, grant, technical assistance to piloting, to significant downstream concessional financial support. That's the knowledge area, the awareness raising, and the downstream funding that we would really like to provide to many of our clients, both public and private sector.
Yes, and also ADB is doing quite a number in terms of electric boat in Thailand. I understand discussion ongoing in the Philippines. That's very exciting.
That one on the Chai Phraya River in Bangkok, that was our private sector colleagues did that one, and we're looking at other locations as well. On the sort of larger maritime sector, we are in the process of putting together a maritime decarbonization strategy initiative with funding to back that up. And we've been working with a lot of the large shipping companies, Lloyd's of London, Silk Alliance out of Singapore, more on the hydrogen and other forms for longer distance international freight movements as well. Because yes, countries can control through their NDCs and LTSs the sort of land-based transport and the coastal shipping. But once you get into the international fields, IMO has made very increasingly more stringent looks at how to decarbonize the maritime sector. So we're working with them how to provide that support within the Asia-Pacific region as well.
Amazing. Are you also looking at like the simple thing, but can be problematic? Like some people argue, say, you know what, I can't insure my electric vehicle because the insurance companies don't understand. They don't want to take a risk, or it's more and other. So those little operational experience sharing from one region to another, no?
The work we did, and the first report came out in 2019 on the sort of future and opportunities for e-vehicles. Yes, we looked at all of that, including the sort of grid factor or the power generation factor, clean, dirty as well, or the change over time, the cost of purchase of that vehicle, the operations of that vehicle, but other associated costs, what may happen with fuel taxation, what may happen with insurance. But in many of the developing economies, the insurance required, as opposed to private additional third-party type insurance, there's varying levels of uptake of those different types of insurance in different lower income or middle income economies. But what we are increasingly seeing is that the vehicle manufacturers of e-vehicles are providing a lot of that support because they see that as a way to facilitate the transition. So in the financing packages, as well as the broader insurance of that, or even a lease model to buy back the vehicle after 3-5 years, whatever it may be. There's different types of ownership models being brought in together with the e-vehicles and the promotion of those e-vehicles.
Amazing. Now, this is very exciting. So if young entrepreneur got excited saying, oh my God, I want to do my startup in the Philippines or Southeast Asia, and ADB has all the resources, where does he or she start?
Was a startup, it would probably be on the private sector side, I would say, but we have invested in quite a few startups and some larger companies that are producing
Through
e-vehicles.
ADB Ventures, you mean?
Yes. And also, sorry, there may be some commercial sensitive data here, so I'm not giving exact examples of these, but we have set up a production facility in one country that would serve that country plus others to ensure that there is a steady supply of e-vehicles being manufactured and used. We promoted, like I said, some of the larger vehicle manufacturing in certain economies where it's starting to grow, but also at the smaller scale, battery manufacturers or the parts of the vehicle assembly. We've provided support to those smaller players in the overall supply chain.
So to access this information, what would be the best place to look for?
Initially go on the ADB website. Please look at the transport section or Google ADB e-vehicle transport, and that will give you those if the ADB site is not quite as easy to access as Google. Send an email to me or our team on the e-vehicle side, and we can respond to what type of information is out there, what type of opportunities for assistance, technical or financial, be available.
And you also mentioned that the GCF, the grant coming in, accessing those grant will be both for public and private sector, I would presume, or?
Because it's for urban public transport, will be a sovereign loan, but the private sector would come in as an operator. So while it's an ADB loan to the government, the private sector plays a significant role in there because they will, in almost all circumstances, be the operator of the public transport system, the bus system. The franchising mechanism, so would the government own the vehicle and on lease it or allow the private operator to do it? There's different types of models, the Singapore, London, Sydney type of bus operation models that are linked, whichever are most suitable to the electric buses that are being utilized in each country.
Yeah, and there will be, of course, private-public partnership in between as well. Amazing. I know you have to dash.
Yeah, but also on that, it's not just the vehicle, it's not a like-for-like swap. We have to look at that training, the just transition part of this. How do we skill up those who will service these vehicles? How do we power that? Where, as you were mentioning earlier on, the solar panels as we're looking to put the solar panels on the roofs of the depot. So there is a significant part of the power requirements on site or free of charge to the operator as well. So there's looking at the whole integrated components that are required to make that smooth transition to EVs.
Very excited. Very excited to hear all this. Is there anything else I could have asked, Jamie? You gave me a lot of insights to what's happening at ADV.
I see a great future in this. I hope I'm not overly optimistic, but I do believe Asia, I just wish more awareness was given of the scale of e-vehicles in the region, particularly for those vehicles that are at the moment are much more suited to that transition, the smaller, the lighter 2-3-wheelers. It's way beyond the tipping point of ICE versus an EV. The second point to summarize would really be support to governments to set those policies. So it becomes very plain to see to all that e-vehicles are the future and ICEs have an end of life sometime in the future because that transition is being made. But the combination of the policies and the finances of EV vehicles versus ICE vehicles, we see a great future, particularly in this region.
Yep, ICE says it all. ICE means freeze. Freeze those cars somewhere. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sahil. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. To continue listening to this conversation, please visit us at Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.